So the purpose of this particular lesson is just to cover off very briefly the differences between .NET Core 2.2 and .NET Core 3.0 from the point of view of the startup files that we're given when we created the Web API project. Now, what I'm looking at here is the .NET Core 3.0 version that we've just been working with to review the project files. And we took a look at the configure services and the configure method, and we also took a look at the program.cs class and the main method and how our application starts up. Now, what I've also created is a project using the .NET 2.2 SDK, just so I can very briefly cover the differences between what we get from these two projects. And also inside a .NET Core 2.2 project, we're given this thing called a values controller as our example controller when we first create the project. Now, in this particular course, I made use of this values controller in the first part of this course because it's a very simple controller and it gives us a few things to work with while we build out our walking skeleton. So what we're going to do as part of this particular lesson as well is create this values controller in our .NET Core 3.0 project. But very briefly, let's take a look at the differences between these two different projects, and I'm just going to open up the program class and the startup class just to highlight the differences. Now, one of the things Microsoft likes to do when they create a new version or a new major version of the framework is things get renamed. Microsoft love to do this, and in the program class in .NET Core 2.2 we had this create web host builder, an iWeb host builder, and we use this web host to create the default builder, which does exactly what we're doing in .NET Core 3.0. It defines some pre-configured defaults for when we start our application, and that means we're going to be using the Kestrel server, we're going to read from our configuration files, we're going to configure logging, and we're going to make use of our startup class. Exactly the same thing we're doing over in our 3.0 version of this project. And like I say, Microsoft like to rename things. So let's play a little game of spot the difference. Here we have a create host builder. Over on the other project, we have a create web host builder. And then we call into create default builder, but they've added a configure web host defaults as an extension method onto this particular class. But it's doing exactly the same thing as the one that we previously had in .NET Core 2.2. So let's take a look at the differences in the startup class. And if I go back to my startup class here, we'll just take a look at the configure services method where we have services add controllers. If we compare that to what was going on in 2.2 and we take a look at the startup class in here, we can see that we've got the services add MVC. Now I mentioned in the previous lesson that this also contains support for Razor views and controllers, and it's your typical model view controller type of application, but it does include support for the web API controllers. Over in 3.0, we've stripped away the unnecessary stuff here, and we've got the ability to just add support for our controllers that we use in a web API. So this is a fine change. This is a good change because we're not adding unnecessary things. Now if we take a look down at the configure method, there's a few more things going on in here. And we've got the ability to configure use routing, we've got the user authorization already added here, and we've got support for using our controller endpoints. If we compare that to our 2.2 version, then we can see that there's a couple of differences in here. What we've got here is this app use MVC, which is an all-encompassing thing of what we are using in .NET Core 3.0. This includes support for attribute-based routing. This includes support for our controllers and our controller endpoints, and it's all wrapped up into this single method. And what Microsoft have done in .NET Core 3.0 is broken that out, and what we see here is we've got the use routing middleware and our use endpoints. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same thing. And the final difference I just want to point out is in the CS proj file. And there are some changes in here. If we take a look at this one, it's pretty simple. All we've got in here is the framework that we're targeting, .NET Core App 3.0. And let's compare this with what we had in 2.2. So I'll just open up the Dating App API CS proj, brand new project that this is installed. I haven't added anything to this. And what we're doing here is we're targeting 2.2. We've also got a call to ASP.NET Core hosting model to say that we want to run our API in process. We don't need that in 3.0. And what we've also got in here is a couple of package references. Now, we're not worried about the razor.design because razor is what you would use if you were using views in a model view controller. But we're using Angular instead of using MVC views. We're using a separate project, an Angular project on the client side. So we don't need that anyway for a web API project. But what we do have in here that we don't have in our .NET Core 3.0 version is this include Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.app. Now, technically this still exists, but it's implicitly included in this call for the project SDK. We do still reference Microsoft ASP.NET Core app, but they've made some changes to this meta package, and that's what this is. This is like a meta package that encompasses a lot of different assemblies that were previously part of the shared framework that's provided when we create a .NET Core project, and we include this reference. Now, these packages that are part of this meta package are located in a runtime store. So if you run a .NET Core application that's got the ASP.NET Core runtime installed, then it will have access to these packages without you needing to add them manually to your project itself. Now, this is different in .NET Core 3.0, and it's probably one of the larger changes they've made is to remove a lot of these shared packages. And what this means is that we start off from a smaller shared package, but it also means that throughout this course, we're going to be adding packages that we previously wouldn't have needed to add if we were using .NET Core 2.2. Now, every time we need to do that, there's going to be an introduction to a lesson where we actually need to do this. You'll see it, it's pretty obvious. There'll be a call out on the top right hand side saying .NET Core 3.0 update, and you'll just need to go ahead and follow my guidance and install the correct or appropriate package for what we're doing in that particular lesson. And these are the main changes in our .NET Core 3.0 template that we're using. And there's one more thing we need to do related to 2.2 that we need to add to our .NET Core 3.0 project, and that's this rather simple values controller that we're just literally going to copy and create in our .NET Core 3.0 project. And the reason for this is because this values controller was provided as part of the .NET Core 2.2 SDK, and it's rather simpler to work with than the weather forecast controller that we have in the 3.0 project. So what we're going to do is literally copy this in its entirety, and attached to this particular lesson is a resource, and look for the values controller.txt file and copy that into your clipboard. And over in our .NET Core 3.0 projects, what we want to do is we're just going to add a new file, and we're going to call it values controller.cs, and we're just going to paste in this particular controller in its entirety as part of our .NET Core 3.0 project, because I do use this values controller in the early part of the course so that we can get our walking skeleton complete, which isn't going to contain any of our actual business logic, but it does keep things nice and simple so that we can make sure we've got our end-to-end communication between our API and our client's application and ensure that all works successfully. So that's the reason for adding this particular controller. Now, I'll never mention again on this course the weather forecast controller or the weather forecast class, and you can actually go ahead and delete both of these from your project if you want to do so. We won't use them or mention them again on this particular course. The only one that we're going to deal with controller-wise at the moment is this values controller. So make sure you've got that copied into your project, and we're good then to continue with the rest of the course.